Are we alone? Well, the answer is we're not alone. And I know that with 100%
You've spoken
certainty.
to people with direct knowledge
Yes,
of a secret legacy UFO program.
correct.
You're saying that the United States government has retrieved alien technology.
Yes, the assessment was non-human, presumably extraterrestrial, but we do have retrieved non-human material and craft that we have in our possession.
Do we have alien bodies?
We do. And I know some physicists don't like me talking about this theory, but it is a theory, so the holographic principle, which was originally conceived to explain how information is encoded on an event horizon of a black hole, which is a distance away from the singularity of a black hole where if you cross it, you're fucked because you're going to get ripped to shreds or you're not coming back. And that principle talks about how information basically from higher dimensional space can be encoded in lower dimensional space. And the easiest example is like us casting a shadow on a sidewalk, right? 3-dimensional object, 2D shadow on a sidewalk. If you lived in 2-dimensional space, flatland, you'd be tripped out. What the fuck am I seeing? But they just don't know that it's really just a person in higher dimensional space. So is some of the, obviously we have physical material that's in 3-dimensional space that we've recovered, but at least maybe some of the phenomenon is really operating in higher spatial dimensions, but is either being projected or quasi-projected into our 3D plus time space, which is really trippy to think about, but we literally do it on a day-to-day basis, like casting shadows.
We're definitely not alone. Absolutely, the data points empirically that we're not alone, yeah. Well, naturally, when you recover something that's either landed or crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. And believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds, it's true.
In spring 2021, I actually flew with a couple colleagues of mine to Las Vegas, and I met with Senator Harry Reid about 9 months before he died. And of course, he's a private citizen now, and I wanted to brief him on the topic, and I wanted to get his kind of thought leadership on it because, he was a Gang of 8 member, right? Which is the top most cleared senators and congressmen. He was the majority leader, for God's sakes, of the Senate. And I knew, he helped sponsor the OSAP program that I mentioned and where they looked at Skinwalker Ranch and some other things. And I wanted to understand, what does Harry Reid actually know? Why did he give $21 million to DIA and Bigelow Aerospace for this? So I'm sitting there in Harry Reid's living room, right next to him with some other witnesses that were there with me. And he straight up says, he's like, yeah, I knew we had UFO material. I was denied access for decades. I tried to get access. And then he explained some of his efforts during OSAP. And I was like, holy shit, did the former majority leader just say, did he just confirm this to me as well? I was already talking to these amazing high-level people, but I have Harry Reid literally saying, yes, we have material, and, he knew it was non-human. In terms of seeing the material himself, he said he was denied access for years, decades was his term, and he actually told me on behalf of me, he had a weekly call with President Joe Biden at the time. And he straight up said to me, he was going to talk to President Biden about this issue.
I saw internally, there was no way that this issue was going to be self-policed. It really should be the U.S. president and other officials that provide the more detailed disclosure, because I don't have all the data. I don't know what some of the ramifications are with certain things. And you have to remember, giving out specific metrics or numbers, foreign intelligence services, Russia, China, etc. They're watching this video right now, and they want to see, did they get their numbers right? And I'm not here to provide, foreign intelligence services additional data. So I have to be very careful about specifics. It's not because I don't want to be transparent, but I do know foreign intelligence services are, watching these kind of videos. Yes, certainly private companies were involved. The specific ones I did provide to the congressional committees and the inspector general, down to specific facilities I am aware of, down to the address, right, where they exist. And also I had the individuals that, firsthand worked on the program provide that disclosure and interview with the inspector general as well. So it wasn't just coming from me. Yes, those same facts were confirmed to me by people with firsthand knowledge that worked on those programs, that there have been crashes and we've retrieved craft and biological material, bodies, if you will, like I've stated previously publicly. The biologics came in a variety of states and morphologies and all that stuff. But that's the stuff I can't quite get into publicly. But I encourage the president and others to kind of explain the types of biological recoveries we've had. I encourage the executive branch in our country to inform the world on that. Yes, some of my interview subjects that I ultimately directed to the inspector general, they did give me a briefing on all the U.S. involved recoveries that happened over the years, and the Mussolini case that, interestingly enough, is already out there in public vernacular thanks to your work. Uncovering that case, and the 1933 Magenta area crash was one of the events that they talked about, and that was one that I submitted in my DoD and pre-publication review to be able to talk about publicly, because I thought that was a very remarkable international case that would hopefully spurn not just U.S. interest but European interest. So when it came down, when they went to recover it, it had a acorn or bell shaped, but what really happened there is they believe that the original craft was lenticular or saucer, because when it crashed, when they came to recover it, all the edges were broken off around the craft, and so it looked like a bell or an acorn, but really it had additional characteristics that were destroyed when it landed. But Pope Pius XII was involved, and he sent a communique through the OSS, the American OSS, and it ended up going to FDR's desk. But as far as I know, unless the records were destroyed, the Vatican and the Pope Pius XII section of the Vatican Secret Archives, there should be documented evidence. From what I was told, now these intel officers that briefed me on this, that had firsthand knowledge, they assumed that the Vatican still had those records and they weren't destroyed. And they postulated if they did, what specific Pope's records it would have been in, because of the time and Pius XII's involvement back then. And of course, that was, ultimately recovered at the end of the war and went under U.S. possession after the war. Yeah, this is an extension of what I mentioned in my initial News Nation interview about that Cold War, that arms race that has been happening behind the scenes, below the noise floor, where certainly our adversaries have their own programs and have, we've been competing with them, to gather all this stuff. And then B, try to make those, engineering breakthroughs that provide, weapons development advancements for, war purposes. Very little of this technology has matriculated into, civil society and all that. So our adversaries certainly have their own programs, and even China, for example, announced that they have their own UAP task force. There was a June 2021 South China Morning Post article where China discusses they're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to evaluate UAP cases. Now, Russia hasn't made a public statement in that regard that I can think of. I mean, they certainly have made some statements in the 1990s, and you are sure very familiar with, but as of late, I think China was the only one to make an official acknowledgement at least that they have a task force, not necessarily anything else, but certainly with our adversaries, we've been engaged in these activities for a long time.